Good afternoon. I'd like to call the March 6, 2012 City Council meeting to order. Will you please rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco.
Here.
Hodgkiss. Here. House. Murillo.
Here.
Rouse. White. Mayor Schneider.
Here. And item number 1.
Item number 1, proclamation declaring March 6, 2012 as Arbor Day.
I see Santa Barbara beautiful folks, right? Mr. Adams, you want to come on up? Yes. Great. Do you want to join? You're good right there? We can see you on TV sitting there anyway, but, you know, it's great. Arbor Day observances were held in California during the week of March 6, 2012, and in the city of Santa Barbara throughout the month of March. And the city of Santa Barbara has been designated a Tree City USA for 32 years by the National Arbor Day Foundation. The city of Santa Barbara is proud of its approximately 40,000 public open space, park, and street trees, and recognizes the importance of professional tree care and annual tree planting programs that create a more livable community. And Arbor Day observances are held at 7 local grade school campuses. This spring, Santa Barbara is celebrating 110 years of city parks, providing stewardship of trees, parks, and open space. And the city acknowledges Santa Barbara Beautiful's significant contribution to our urban forest through the planting of over 12,000 street trees in the past 46 years. So therefore, I, Helene Schneider, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Santa Barbara, California, do hereby acknowledge and proclaim March 6, 2012 as Arbor Day in the city of Santa Barbara and recognize the value that trees place in enhancing the quality of our lives. And thank you so much for all the work that you do each and every year. Thank you. Congratulations. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say Santa Barbara Beautiful has a great partnership with the city and the Parks and Rec Department and everyone here to provide an urban forest. I think we're closing in on 13,000 trees that Santa Barbara Beautiful has donated monies to get those trees, as well as through the year some of the labor and the young tree care, etc. So I want to thank you on behalf of our board of directors at Santa Barbara Beautiful for such a gorgeous artistic certificate. Look at this scroll work. I mean, this should be in a museum. So thank you very much, Madam Mayor and council members. Thank you.
Item number 2, employee recognition, service award pins.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, as you know, every month we present service award pins to our employees that are celebrating important anniversaries with the city. And we have several who are receiving pins this month, and I want to read their names into the record, and we have 2 employees that are here to receive their pins. First, with 5 years, Richard Welsh, who's a building inspector in community development. Also with 5 years, Macon Bear, electronics/communications technician 2 in Public Works. Matthew Ward, a water distribution surveyor, Public Works. I don't think surveyor's right. Jody Thomas, senior library technician in the library. With 15 years, Jose Moncluse, who's a carpenter in Public Works. Donald McNevin, who's a senior maintenance worker in Parks and Rec. With 20 years, Liz Lamone, who's a redevelopment specialist in community development. And Kristen Shamardola, who's a police department. With 25 years, Sergeant Marty Ensign in the police department. James Russell, maintenance supervisor 2 in Public Works. And Fernando Reynoso, who's the airport patrol supervisor at the airport. And we have 2 employees here to receive pins today. The first is Peggy Avila, who I think has the longest title of any position in the city, which is Water Reclamation Inspector / Cross Connection Specialist. And then with 35 years, we have Chris Nail, who's the Police Information Technology Manager.
Peggy Avila can come on up. There's your pin. Thank you. Peggy Avila began her career with the City of Santa Barbara in 1980 as a temporary maintenance worker 1 for the parking division. Peggy was hired as a permanent employee in March 1982 for the Streets Division, transferring to El Estero Wastewater Treatment Plant as plant operator trainee in 1987. In 1988, Peggy was promoted to Maintenance Worker 2 for the Water Distribution and Collection Section, where she performed pipeline installation, maintenance, and repair work for both the water and wastewater systems. Peggy was recognized for her excellent work and leadership skills with a promotion in 1991 to a Utility Worker 3 and 2 promotions in 1998 to Heavy Equipment Operator and then to Utility Crew Leader, where she was responsible for leading field staff on repair and maintenance of both the water and wastewater infrastructure. In 2001, Peggy was promoted to her current position, where she provides guidelines to the recycled water users and enforces state backflow and cross-connection regulations for the protection of the city's drinking water system. Peggy has received numerous commendations over the years for her courtesy and professionalism while performing her job. She's been recognized as the Public Works Employee of the Month for her excellent work. She's received recognition for her participation in the Emergency Watering Project at Alameda Park in August 1990. And recently, Peggy received a letter of appreciation for her efforts during the devastating Tea Fire in 2008. Peggy has achieved many certifications, including her State Water Distribution Grade 4, Backflow Prevention Tester, Cross-Connection Control Specialist from USC, State Water Treatment Operator Grade 2, and her California Water Environment Association Grade 1. She also serves as adjunct faculty at Santa Barbara City College, where she teaches a course on cross-connection and backflow testing. Peggy and her partner Lorraine reside in Ventura. They both enjoy being outdoors and are avid campers and boaters and enjoy riding in motorcycle charity events. And Peggy, I'm very pleased and honored to recognize your 30 years of service as well as your many professional accomplishments. On behalf of the City Council and your fellow citizens, thank you and congratulations on this great achievement. Thank you very much.
Madam Mayor, City Council, it's been a long, interesting ride. I just want to say thank you for keeping me around.
Thank you. You can tell you ride a bike with a long, interesting ride. Thank you. Christine Nail, come on up. We don't give many of these out. 35 years of service. That's pretty amazing. Christine Nail began her career with the City of Santa Barbara Police Department on March 28, 1977. She has served under the command of 7 police chiefs and has received dozens of letters of appreciation and commendation, including recognition from Anacapa Sciences, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the United States Coast Guard, the City's Swift Award, and the Police Department Supervisor of the Year Award. Christine manages the Information Technology Unit and Crime Analysis Department. Under Christine's leadership, the Santa Barbara Police Department has been at the forefront of the advancement of information technology. Together with her staff, Christine administrates a regional network providing 18 law enforcement agencies having over 1,100 users access to state and national databases as well as the COPLINK data sharing system. During her 35-year career, Christine has been a leader in the transition from the 3x5 index cards, once used for record keeping, to the current enterprise-wide system that includes computer-aided dispatch, mobile computers, mobile reporting, records management, and electronic workflow from the time a 911 call is received until a report is electronically submitted to the database. From desktop computers to digital imagery to fiber optics, Christine has played a critical role in the planning, development, and implementation of the various technology systems throughout the police department. Christine's advanced skill level with the business intelligence tool Cognos enables her to develop comprehensive reports used for CompStat, crime mapping, and the police department webpage, grant applications, and federal reporting requirements. Christine is the proud mother of daughters Janice and Julie. She enjoys gardening, the practice of yoga, and being a docent at Lotusland. So Christine, it's with great pleasure and a true honor for me today to honor you for your 35 years of service to the City of Santa Barbara. On behalf of the City Council and the citizens of Santa Barbara, I want to thank you, and you and your fellow employees, thank you too, and congratulations. Congratulations.
Madam Mayor, members of council, 35 years is a long time in any profession, and to answer a question in the back of the room, yes, there were computers back then. I want to take this opportunity to recognize and thank the police IT staff, Martin Alexander, Kathy Chan, Dennis Diaz, and David Strady, for their exceptional work. We've been part of an amazing time in the history of the police department, and as the IT manager, I'm proud to stand before you today. To list just a few of our accomplishments, we brought the city its first web page, its first intranet, online payment system, mobile reporting system, and regional data sharing system. We're considered leaders in the law enforcement technology arena, and that's the result of a hardworking and cohesive team. I would like to thank my dear friends who've supported me through the hard times and celebrated with me through the happy times. And most importantly, a special thank you to my family, whose love and support enable me to successfully travel this path. Madam Mayor, members of council, thank you for this recognition.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, there aren't, Madam Mayor.
Okay, public comment. I have a number of speakers here. There's 2 minutes at the podium. For those of you leaving the chambers, if you could just do so quietly so we could keep moving, that would be great. The first speaker will be Kenneth Locke, to be followed by Phil Walker.
My name is Kenneth Locke. I've been kind of making you aware of this next age that we're going to be entering into. On my site, on my Tennaissance, the Renaissance of Tennis, I've added a page called what about enlightenment? The enlightened class of athlete. And actually what I represent is the first athlete to become enlightened through the means of tennis. And then what I do is I'm raising and kind of starting a whole new class of athlete. Historically, the athletes haven't been enlightened, and the relationship that they've had needs to be reformed, and they have to raise themselves up a notch to get to the level that I was able to get to, kind of in relation to the mind-body integration. A lot of the concepts that this age that we've been in, like competition, I'm sorry to say, in this age of enlightenment, there's no need for competition. There's actually no need for capitalism. This is where we actually all become enlightened. I have a page on my site called the Counterculture of Tennis. We actually live in a time of like multiple countercultures. Actually, I'm sorry to say that I'm using an example of the tennis in relation to like the USTA, the USPTA, the ATP as a counterculture, and actually how a counterculture actually works and operates in relation to education, in relation to the economy. So it's just kind of an interesting situation here that we have. I think it's important that the work that I'm doing is recognized again, because it'll actually bring us up a notch where we actually should be and should have been there all along. Thank you.
Phil Walker will be followed by Rick Goodfriend. Phil, there you are.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and esteemed members of the City Council. I think I'll entitle this Dust Up, Dust Off, in reference to the bit of controversy concerning the helipad at Cottage Hospital. On the evening of May 19, 2009, my wife was in Cottage Hospital. I was there too, but not very responsive. The first attending neurologist came out and said, "Mrs. Walker, the bad news is your husband suffered the worst kind of stroke. I had a subcortical hemorrhage, a hemorrhagic stroke. The good news is we think we got it in time." The point I'm trying to make is time is of the essence in both cardiac and stroke involvements. And, if I had that event at the front loading of the Hesacita fire, it could have been a lot different, delayed in traffic, whatever. I would have loved to have a medevac dust off, but you know, in the aggregate, I'm sure I live in a much noisier neighborhood, just a block and 3/4 off Milpas on Quinientos. And the point being is time is of the essence. It's life-saving, and a bit of noise is well worth the reward. The other point, I understand you're having a PERS workshop tomorrow. You're looking at a guy that put over 30 years into the PERS system, and you know, I never thought, honestly, I'd live this long to be able to retire. I've had a bunch of close calls. The point being, the ratios, I paid for them all along. I think I started at 1.6 or 1.8. Now it's up to 2.7. But we've taken the regular and general employees have taken the lion's share of the employee contribution all along. And every time there was an increase, it seemed to be management driven, in collaboration with the SEIU. But I never asked for it. It just was, it's put on you, and that's the way it was. So the way it is the way it was. And that's something to ponder. One other quick thing.
Quick thing.
Okay, very quickly. I worked with a gentleman. I did 15, 18 years at the Anchorage wastewater plant. He was on Tier 3 going to 4 when he departed there, and it's counterproductive. It does not make the tier system for a cohesive workforce, and it's not of benefit to the fair citizens of this town. Thank you very much.
Rick Goodfriend will be followed by Wanda Livernoy.
Hi, Mayor, City Council. Several things I want to talk about very quickly. I went in front of the Parks Department Advisory Board about the seaweed on the beach, and there were 4 people from the Parks Department and poor little me, and they were saying this has to happen, that has to happen. Anyways, it came down to budget. As soon as I heard budget, the Parks Department Advisory Board said, well, we don't deal with budget, we deal with, the City Council does that. So I want to bring this up to the City Council, that we look at the seaweed on the beach and how we can get that cleaned up sometimes. From what I heard with the Parks Department is there's different rules. And I know there's different rules, but these rules can be changed, and I know they can be changed. So I'm wondering if you guys can bring this up and maybe have some of the Parks Department come and give you a report, or you can watch the report from the meeting that I was at. I would really appreciate that, because it just helps. If tourists come down there, it's horrible. Locals come down there, it's horrible. And they come, but maybe they won't come back. So that's one part. The other part is, as most of you know, I was beat up by a transient on Milpas Street down by the beach November 5th. And I'm coming in front of you now because it's taken this long for the DA to say, no, we're not going to give you any help, any support. Where does this come from? It comes from a report from the police department. And I just talked to the chief, and we're going to look into that a little bit more. But I just want an update that things are not okay. Emotionally, physically, they're not okay. And this is what happens when people are hit down on Milpas Street or anywhere, on State Street or anywhere. There's that victim mentality, and all kinds of things happen that hopefully you're not aware of, but it does happen. I was never beat before either, but things change very quickly.
Thank you. I think Mr. Hotchkiss has a question for you.
I do. What beach in particular were you talking about?
I was working with the Alzheimer's walk, and I was across at the parking lot where Milpas.
No, when you were talking about seaweed.
Oh, seaweed.
Yes.
Oh, Ledbetter.
Ledbetter. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you talked to the chief to follow up on that. So
Yeah, so
we'll follow up with him.
one last thing. Quick,
Very brief,
very
because
quick.
you have your action.
Junipero and, I don't know how to say it, and Garden Street and Laguna, there's these drainage ditches there, and they're so deep and so dangerous that if anybody steps in one by accident, which is very easy, it's by the Rose Garden, so people are crossing there. It's going to be a big lawsuit, I know. So if somebody could look at that.
Thank you, Mr. Goodfriend.
Thank you.
Wanda's coming up to be followed by Dinah Marianne Wells, or Well.
Hi,
afternoon.
thanks for this chance to speak. 533 Brinkerhoff. There's a property on the corner of Haley and De La Vina. I think it's 136 West Haley. That was part of the bridge redo and everything. That property is still vacant. Now, various officials have said to me that it needs to be auctioned off. What are we waiting for? I think the time is now. There have been several concerns from neighbors about calling the police for a variety of things that have gone on there. It needs to change hands. That's number one. Number two, we need to do some rethinking about the parking on the 500 block of De La Vina, and I'm not sure where to start. If you have a suggestion, go to this committee or get a petition together or whatever, that would be a help too. Okay? Thanks.
Sure. And the item that's up for auction, I think, is in process. So
Is it in process?
Yeah, and I think.
Do we have a date or a?
Not off the top of my head, but we can make sure we get that to you with an update.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dinah, Marianne Well, to be followed by Steve Price, and then the final speaker.
Eileen,
Come on up to the podium.
thank you so much. May I have a drink of water before I start?
As long as it's really quick. You have 2 minutes up at the podium. Do you want me to have someone else come up and then you come up afterwards?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, go right ahead then.
Madam Mayor, City Council, all those that love the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America. I have a private secret. Since the age of 15 years old, I have planned to become First Lady of the United States of America. I'm 60 years old now, and I want to write myself in as co-president on a write-in vote with my husband, George. I want to be co-president with George, my husband, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. My name is Dinah Marianne Wellsand. A lot of people call me Chris for short and call him George for short. So I'm going to write co-president and write my name in on the ballot. I've lived in Santa Barbara County 41 years. The first time I came to Santa Barbara was in 1971 with a born loser. That's where I met Jerry Layton again, where I took Citrus Junior College Police Science when I was 17 years old near Azusa, California, United States of America. Officer Jerry Layton and I have always been friends. And I am hoping good things for him as well as myself. I have been in front of Judge Adams many times, and he is the most lenient judge I know. I thank the district attorney. I thank the state capital, Sacramento. I thank the state of California and the United States of America. Thank you, Helene Schneider, and city council members who will support me and my husband, George, in this upcoming November election. Thank you so much. God bless you all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Steve Price? Steve still here? I don't see him. Kate Longstory will be the final speaker.
Mayor Schneider and members of the Santa Barbara City Council, my name is Kate Longstory, and I am performing 100 hours of community service by occupying the courts, educating our community about legal abuse syndrome, by being an American with Disabilities Act advocate in the courts, and by occupying the public podium. Here is your weekly Gazette, February 28th to March 6th. Santa Barbara had a marvelous first Thursday. The dozens of tickets issued to Santa Barbara occupiers will be dismissed on April 24th. The injunction filed against the city proceeds, however, even though your appointed council called it silly. It has been suggested that we elect our city council from now on so that we don't end up with a pig in the poke and a very expensive lawsuit. The Occupy movement had several calls to action last week. There was solidarity with Greece, and problems were brought to light. Occupy education, occupy foreclosure, occupy our prisons, occupy corruption. The movie Moby Duck made an appearance, and we all now know that we have another island of trash in our ocean, this being 86,000 rubber duckies. Thursday, March 8th, is International Day of Women. Tomorrow is Purim. The full moon is in Virgo. And to end, I would like to thank the Main Library City parking lot workers for helping this damsel in distress. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment. Move on to the consent calendar, and you have some items to read there.
Item number 4, introduction of ordinance for lease of city attorney office space at 740 State Street. Recommendation that council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara authorizing the city attorney to execute Amendment Number 3 to Agreement Number 16,332 with BDC Management as agents for the owners to extend the term of the lease for the city attorney's office at 740 State Street, Suite 201, from February 1st, 2012 to July 31st, 2017.
Thank you. Without further objection, we'll waive further reading. Are there any items to take off the consent calendar, or is there a motion to accept?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that concludes the consent calendar. On to item number 6.
Item number 6, ordinance amendments related to construction prohibited in the vicinity of the Conejo landslide and homes destroyed in the T-Fire. Recommendation that council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending Chapter 22.90 of Title 22 of the Municipal Code in order to define new construction to allow those homes which existed on November 12, 2008 to be rebuilt when they have been destroyed by fire or other casualty.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Wiley.
Madam Mayor, I'll be making the presentation on this item. The proposed ordinance is an amendment to Chapter 2290, which is an ordinance that's been in place since 1985. Shortly after the city realized that there was a real earth movement, landslide movement problem in the Conejo Road area. This was shortly after a very rainy year, rain year of 1983-84, and the area was seeing considerable earth movement. And at the time, the city council commissioned geological studies and engineering studies. The geological studies to ascertain the extent of the problem, and the engineering studies to go in and repair the city streets and utility lines. And all that work culminated in this ordinance, particularly the geological information. At the time, the geologists identified 3 areas that were actually subsets of each other: Area A, Area B, Area C, or slight Area C. Each A being the largest, B in the middle, and C being the smallest. Over the year, and the ordinance did 2 things initially. It prohibited new construction for a 5-year period of time until we saw whether this earth movement problem was permanent or not, and really had a chance to determine the extent of it and the seriousness of it. And the second thing was to ban all septic systems in this area, and part of that had to do with the concern that the septic systems could possibly be contributing to or exacerbating the earth movement. That ordinance has been amended from time to time over the years, most recently in 1997 in a general sense, to make it part of the code, to essentially to codify it and to make it a permanent ordinance. The next, in this context, the next relevant event is really the T-Fire in November of 2008. And the T-Fire, of course, went through this area and destroyed several homes in this area, in particular within the Slide Mass C area. We're really down to the Slide Mass C now as the problem area, if you will, where any geologist that looks at this, and there have been many over the years, will say that now we can identify the area of Slide Mass C as the real problem area, and as a result, the city has essentially allowed construction outside of Slide Mass C, so long as the construction is not less than 25 feet away from Slide Mass C. Then, as I say, the T-Fire occurred, and 3 homes in Slide Mass C were destroyed by the T-Fire. Those property owners initiated a lawsuit against the city, and that suit recently went to trial, a court trial in Superior Court, and the judge determined there was inadequate evidence of a public safety concern to support the city prohibiting new construction within Slide Mass C for those homes which had not been destroyed by earth movement prior to the T-Fire. So that essentially is what this ordinance does. It says that if a home was in existence on November 12th, 2008, essentially the day the T-Fire started, I believe it started in the evening, then it could be rebuilt. I think we're down to we're talking about 7 properties here, the 3 property owners who sued the city and 4 other properties. Those 4 others were not destroyed in the T-Fire, but they continue to exist. There is no apparent damage to those 4 other structures as a result of earth movement. And in theory, they could be destroyed by fire in the future. And the essence of the judge's ruling is that if they were destroyed by fire in the future, the city should allow them to rebuild, along with the 3 plaintiffs who filed this lawsuit. So, as I say, the wording of this amendment would allow those homes to be built on those 7 properties. And again, this is all single-family residential zoning here. So we're talking about the potential of 3 homes being built on the 3 parcels where the homes were destroyed in the T-Fire, and then 4 other homes that are existing, but if they should be destroyed in the future by a casualty, they could be rebuilt. The final point I want to make is nothing in this ordinance revises the uniform building code, uniform code requirements with respect to rebuilding or the building officials' discretion to apply the uniform codes to new construction. And that's important to remember because typically, particularly in Santa Barbara, where we're pretty strict about such things, you are not allowed to build on a vacant parcel without submitting a soils report and then having a licensed engineer, often a structural engineer, sometimes an architect, someone who is licensed by the state to do this, to prepare home plans. You can't build without having certified licensed plans submitted that are consistent with your soils report. And we're not changing any of that here. These homes, these parcels, if they're rebuilt, will still have to have a soils report. Now, a lot of this information is already available. We're not going to, I don't think, insist that people recreate the wheel here because there's a lot of geology information on this Slide Mass C, but at least they'll have to take that existing information, perhaps get site-specific borings or information with respect to their parcels, and then their licensed professional, as I say, a structural engineer or an architect or some other engineer, will have to engineer a home foundation consistent with those recommendations. And that's not going to be easy to do in this area. And one last thing that people have asked about is the disclosure, whether a future buyer of one of these homes or maybe a bank that might make a mortgage against one of these homes, whether they'll be advised. And I think the answer is clearly yes, that this is such a well-known, significant problem. Anyone who looks at the city files for these properties will realize, will understand that this is in Slide Mass C. And I think the law is pretty clear that the property owners, anyone representing them, such as a real estate broker, would have to advise any potential buyer of these issues. So hopefully people will buy with full knowledge and understanding of what they're buying into. And The same would be true for these property owners in terms of rebuilding. And as I say, it's not going to be a simple process for them to rebuild. But as I say, this would be consistent with the judge's ruling if the City Council does introduce and adopt this ordinance. And I'd be happy to answer any questions on this subject.
Any questions first? Mr. House.
I just want to illuminate or ask our staff to help illuminate a couple of the things that came up in our ordinance committee meetings, and I think it's important on this particular issue. One of them had to do with city's liability in the future, which was sort of alluded to a little bit by the disclosure conversation we just had, and the second has to do with how the city building official and his staff will be reviewing these properties and where's the limit of their ability to say no if they felt that it was an unsafe proposal or if it was something that wouldn't that meet maybe our standards but maybe another engineer associated with the applicant felt it was okay. So let's just maybe the liability piece, Mr. Wiley, if you could take a minute and just express to us as a whole council where the city would stand in the future if there were a problem with a particular property having given a building permit to somebody. What does that open us up to or not?
Thank you, Councilmember House. That's a good question. Fortunately, the law is very good for cities and counties in this area, and by that I'm referring to the Government Tort Claims Act. And you know, there's a saying in municipal law that tort liability or negligence liability for a city is statutory, and by that they mean you can't sue a city or a county unless there is a statute that specifically allows that sort of lawsuit. And that's the reverse of general negligence liability, say for a private landlord. In this context, there is a statute in the Government Tort Claims Act that provides an absolute immunity from suing a city for having issued a building permit. And it actually, you see this from time to time. People will sue their contractor, maybe for a home addition or maybe for a new home, even commercial residential. They'll sue their contractor and they'll try to also sue the city and say, your building inspector should have caught this, and you never should have issued a building permit because this was wrong and this wasn't. It may even be that there's a clear violation of the uniform codes, but this statute I'm referring to says you cannot sue the city for issuing a building permit. Our permits are regulatory, but we don't, you know, we're not an insurance company guaranteeing the perfection of the work of a general contractor. So I think, and over the years, I've just never seen anyone succeed in suing us for having issued a building permit.
Thank you very much. And then, Madam Mayor, if I may, to Mr. Estrella, our building official for the city of Santa Barbara, the question about you know, there's a requirement, for instance, for a soils report. We have hillside design guidelines. That's a design issue. But when we get to the building and safety code, you're going to be holding them to a fairly high standard in this kind of environment, as you would for any development. But at what point does your staff's purview, if you will, end, and then it's up to the homeowner themselves and their contractors' devices on what gets put on the ground after that? Where's the line between those?
Well, Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, you actually asked a good question. And yes, as with all projects, we want to ensure that the minimum California codes of regulations are being adhered to. So that's really the first thing. And as Mr. Wiley indicated, that all new buildings would require a soils report. In this case, it would be an engineering geologist report. Part of that has already been completed by the Grover Hollingsworth report of 2009, so there are some recommendations in there. So we would review those recommendations. The reality is that we would probably forward that to one of our consultant engineering geologists for peer review, just to make sure that the checks and balances are in place. And that there's not anything that is really odd. But given that the soils report dictates the type of foundation, and being that there's a licensed person that will be signing off on the design and structural aspects of the project and ensuring that all codes are adhered to, a building permit will be issued. So that's kind of like the general process. It's a normal process. I don't see anything really somewhat different. We will obviously be taking a close look at the soils analysis just to make sure that all the checks and balances are in place.
I see. The ultimate responsibility then lives with the owner of the property and their relationship with the professional who is licensed to be able to give them guidance ultimately as to what gets done in that kind of soils condition environment in that kind of situation.
Yep, Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, that's actually correct. We will be dealing with licensed professional architects, perhaps a civil, perhaps a structural, and engineering geologists. So they will be putting their license on the line to design these homes to make sure that they are built in accordance with the codes and are considered safe. That's our job also. What we do not know is the after effects if a permit could be issued. There might be some ground utilities that might be disconnected, and that brings in other things that we'll have to consider at that time. But when that permit is issued, and our stamp is on that, we will be relying on the engineering professionals to demonstrate that those homes meet the minimum California code requirements.
Okay, thank you. And then, Madam Mayor, the last thing I just realized, we did talk about our obligation as a municipality to provide, if you will, access on those roads and to work with utility companies and make sure that the utilities are provided in a safe way. There's a lot of unknowns here still, if I understand our conversation at the Ordinance Committee. Maybe Mr. Wiley would want to address that, and then thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilmember House, I think it is, of course, generally true that this is an area of the city. These are city streets, and so we will be obligated to keep these streets usable generally. There might be some areas where it could make a sense to abandon the public street and let it to become a private street. But generally, we'll have to provide vehicular and emergency access to this area, and that won't change. The city, of course, provides water and sewer service, and it's a practical matter. We just can't stop doing that here. It does prompt me to point out that because of this, being this approach of the city of trying to prohibit new construction since 1985, by and large, we've dealt with the major concerns in Slide Mass C. There are most of the parcels, other than the 7 we're referring to here, all of the other parcels in Slide Mass C are now vacant, cannot be rebuilt. In fact, most of them are owned by a nonprofit corporation that the city assisted the property owners in forming, and then they receive FEMA money to sell their property to the nonprofit corporation. So, by and large, we have dealt with the more serious movement concerns and parcels up there. But we will be obligated to continue to provide utilities in some way, even if that's above ground, as we've had to do in a service area across the canyon that's actually not in the city, and provide vehicular and emergency access.
We do have some public comment. I have one question on the ordinance itself. It says about being rebuilt when they've been destroyed by fire or other casualty. Is it any kind of fire? Are we really talking about a wildfire? If it's a wildfire, should we put wildfire in there? I just want to be specific in what, because there are other properties still intact, and we're looking prospectively here. So if there's a future fire and it was within the house, is that really, would this pertain to that, or is it a wildfire we're talking about?
Yes, it would. And the judge's rationale was that there was inadequate evidence of a real public safety, an immediate public safety concern, such that the city did not have the legal authority to prohibit new construction.
Okay.
So it really doesn't matter what the cause of the fire would be, or what the other casualties could be, like an earthquake or windstorm or something like that.
Okay, just wanted to be clear because it's all about the details in the ordinance. Did you have a question, Mr. Hotchkiss? Go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. Could it be further landslide?
It could. It actually could, which is odd when you think about it. But, part of this was, the part of the ruling of the judge was, unlike, say, the La Conchita area or other areas, I know Laguna Beach had homes that were on such steep slopes that if there was earth movement or if they broke, they would come down the hill and potentially hurt someone, kill someone in the middle of the night, the occupants and someone else. We don't really have that situation, and I think that was a significant factor in why the judge ruled the way he did. In other words, the worst that could happen with movement now in this area is the home would crack and break, but it would not be precipitous. It would not be an immediate danger.
Thank you.
Okay, we have two members of the public that like to speak. Roy Harthorn, to be followed by Rick Algert.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Roy Harthorn. I'm a building code consultant. And on behalf of both my 140 Santa Barbara Community Action Network, SBCAN, clients who signed a petition to Mayor and Council some months ago regarding conditions in the Conejo Slide area, as well as other clients more directly affected by the slide ordinance. I'm here asking you to consider actually simply repealing the ordinance. It would be a much simpler matter. It would be more direct. It would minimize the city's future liability to the greatest extent in the respect. It would also address the remaining lots that the proposed amendment does not address. And by my count, there are 3, as well as the additional 5 that are in the nonprofit. It would also make all your land use policies very consistent. Inside the slide, T-fire, not T-fire, outside the slide, etc. The same statute of immunities would apply to everybody, same protection. And lastly, actually, the ordinance itself, by virtue of attempting to keep vacant land vacant, is actually counterproductive in the respect that vacant land goes unmanaged. It is soaking up water at tremendous rates. The city's own geologist, Frank Kitten, attributes the greatest factor of the instability of the slide to rainwater infiltration. And a typical house of 2,000 square feet plus additional hardscape of equal amount with just 1 inch of rain actually sheds 10 tons of water. In a rainstorm like we had in March of last year, where 13 inches of rain fell in a 10-day period of time, it's 13 times 10, 130 tons. You multiply that times 8 lots, you've got 1,600 tons of water that is infiltrating into the slide. So I think it's worthy that you are recognizing what needs to be done for the immediate needs of the litigation. However, I think you really need to start looking at a better management scheme, particularly bridging the chasm between community development and public works in terms of public works policies and community development land use policies in order to effectively maximize the catchment of water and collection and safely disposing it to Sycamore Creek where it will not infiltrate and activate the slide. Thank you.
Rick Algert.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council. Excuse me. My name is Rick Algert. My wife and I have owned the vacant lot at 502 Conejo Road since 1984. Our 3 children were born here in the city of Santa Barbara. We've been living in San Luis Obispo County for the last 22 years. But I tell you all that so that you know we're not neophytes to this situation, even though I haven't been in this chamber in a long time. We understand, we have monitored and watched carefully. We come visit the lot a number of times each year. Our dream, always long-term in buying the lot, was to attempt to do some very modest residential development on it. I should say, too, I meant to say this in the beginning, we purchased the lot with an open building permit and a water meter. We have a water meter, and we've been paying, we still have a water meter, and paying water service all these years. Our dream was always to do some kind of very small develop perhaps some kind of unique yurt, even kind of appropriate to the site. And as the city attorney mentioned, it's going to be, we understood it would be a very, very difficult process. The challenges we've watched, we've known most of the people up there, that the hardship and the difficulties of the city. Over the years, we tried a number of times to get the city to work with us on a building permit, and the short answer, as you know, probably the process as well as the answer was always no. Most recently, we did, and it was a difficult decision, join the lawsuit of the 3 T-Fire homeowners up there. And last year, early on, we were actually dropped from the case. The judge decided that the statute of limitations started running on us as a vacant lot on the adoption, I believe, of the final adoption of the permanent building ordinance. Therefore, we didn't have standing because the statute of limitations had run on us. It doesn't take a liberal reading of the court's decision to determine, in my opinion at least, that if we had standing, had continued the lawsuit, most likely the judge would have found that our property also would have found for our property also, and that we had suffered from inverse condemnation also. That is not necessary. Some might think that's not an equitable situation for us. I'm glad for the other property owners. What I'm here today to ask you to do is, in the longer term, at some point, I hope the city might reconsider your strategy for these vacant lots. There's a few, not many, and I believe that I have come to believe, honestly, over the years, that Mr. Hawthorne is correct, that a lot of the best solution might come from, say, some actions to try to reduce the water that comes into the hillside, especially at our portion of the lot, and improve the drainage in the area. And I'm just here to tell you, I drove down to say that if the city would ever choose to look at this as a different sort of situation, we would be happy to work with the city in making some kind of private property improvements, management activity to reduce the water that goes into the hillside on our property and improve drainage in exchange for some very modest building envelope.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that concludes the public comments to the council. Mr. Hotchkiss?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Wiley, have we ever considered what Mr. Hawthorne was suggesting?
Councilmember Hotchkiss, I can only say that we've spent thousands of dollars over the years in geologist report, and it's just a lot more complicated than the rainwater soaking in. It's a very deep, ancient landmass, landslide movement that is exacerbated during, triggered during rainy years. But I guess my best answer is it's a lot more complicated than that.
Right, and it is a public safety issue to some degree. I mean, at least, although not houses tumbling onto each other, but
our position has been that it is, and that has to do with the disconnection of utilities, particularly electric and gas utilities, that can happen pretty precipitously. For example, I don't know if you're familiar with Eland Place, but it's a small cul-de-sac right in the heart.
I am actually, yes.
And Eland Place is, is just basically does not even exist anymore, right. And that's only in the last few years. We've had monitoring stations where, over the years, a surveyor has monitored the movement. Now it's all done with satellite measurements, GPS measurements, and the movement's been incredible in recent years. So, we presented that evidence to the judge. He didn't feel it was sufficient to overcome the property owner's property rights. But I think the city's position, whether it's Public Works or Mr. Estrella, is still that there are some real serious and some dangers there with new construction. And in the long run, it's best not to have homes in that area.
Would we have new liabilities if we, as it were, walked away?
Good question. No, I don't think so. Not at this point. I should have mentioned that. We're down. The judge's ruling initially, and this was in connection with the demurrer shortly after the lawsuit was filed, was that the T-Fire, the people who lost their homes in the T-Fire had a new period to sue the city, a new statute of limitations that only applied to the people who lost their homes in the T-Fire And by logical extension, it would apply to those people who didn't lose their homes, but who might lose their homes in the future. So that's why this ordinance only impacts those 7 lots and not the other lots, such as Mr. Algert's, which, as Mr. Algert mentioned, for example, he was one of the original plaintiffs. He was dismissed out of the lawsuit by the city's demurrer, and that period for appeal is long. So that's a final judgment, and it couldn't be relitigated.
Could I ask Mr. Strathern to come up, please? Mr. Hawthorne, I'm sorry. How would you foresee what you suggest working, knowing the city's position and liabilities, et cetera?
Well,
I mean, you're basically saying hands off, walk away, treat it like any other street.
Right. Because as Mr. Estrella and Mr. Wiley point out, the existing codes are very effective and very detailed, and the city is very rigorous in their enforcement. So, for example, the city has roundly accepted the Grover Hollingsworth report in previous amendment and in this amendment in their staff report. And Mr. Algert was one of the Grover Hollingsworth clients, and Mr. Hollingsworth did prescribe a foundation system that will provide the same safety as the 3 plaintiffs, and as well as the other 4 or 5 participants in that study that were outside the slide boundary. So I see the building codes are very rigorous and effective, and those professionals know what they're doing. They will do slope stability studies. They know the laws of physics, and there are 3 basic factors in a slope stability study: slope angle, strength of the materials, and weight of the material. And 2 are fixed in this case. We know what the slope is of that slide. We know the strength of the materials. The only variable, and we see it in direct correlation with the slide activity, is rainfall. It is the infiltration, and that is by far Mr. Kenton's primary cause. He did not find any migrating water. There is actually bedrock at the top of Eland Place under the remaining home at the top up there, and recent inspections have found no cracks in that home. And so it's all very much a matter of individual engineering, and this engineering is sound when it's properly applied.
Okay, very much. Mr. Wiley, if we passed the recommended ordinance today, in the future with more examination, could we come back and, as it were, abandon this whole thing? In other words, is that an option? And this is a big question, so I don't think you can't make a snap judgment on this.
Councilmember Hotchkiss, the answer is yes. This ordinance wouldn't preclude reconsidering the entire subject at any point in the future.
Thank you.
Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The gentleman that spoke that was dropped from the lawsuit, was that property involved in the was it a FEMA compensation that occurred in the 80s, which some properties were purchased? Could you describe that history a little bit for us?
Councilmember White, yes, I was referring to the fact that in the late 1990s, there was some FEMA money, so federal money available, administered through the State Office of Emergency Management. And it was sort of one-time money for this sort of thing, areas of California where there was earth movement and damaged homes. And the several property owners came to the city and actually explained this to us, asked us to assist them in going after those funds. But as I say, it did require, in order to sell out to this program, it did require someone to hold title to the properties. and a nonprofit corporation was formed to do that. I think that was all finalized in 1998. I don't know specifically that Mr. Algert was advised of this. I only know that generally everyone in Slide Mass C, I've been told by Public Works that everyone was noticed, all the property owners were noticed and had the ability to opt into this program. I do believe, now that I think of it though, this parcel that Mr. Algert's owned has always been vacant, and he purchased it after the ordinance went into place as vacant land. So I don't think he would have been eligible as a parcel that's always been vacant to sell out.
It required the land to be developed in order to
Right.
be eligible for this. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Mr. House?
I just want to comment, and some of us, Mr. White and I, both having been on the Planning Commission for some long time, have been, involved in ensuring, I guess, over time that we really upheld this ordinance and learned a lot about it as it went along, and felt very strongly that it was in the city's best interest to abide by what we had done, and that it was, and of course for me it was a little more not so nuanced as it is now, in the sense that I thought there was probably a liability for the city associated with it directly, and that we had a responsibility all the way down to the end of the design of the appropriate foundations, and our building inspecting, if you will, would be the final word. And I understand now that it really does, we do our very best, but ultimately it relies on the property owner's best judgment with the advice and support of a qualified professional. The reason I just turned on my mic here is fairness is really an important value for me here, and I mean with anything. And I wonder about it a little bit. We have land that is obviously moving, moving rapidly in some places, other places not so. None of it is the cataclysmic kind of thing like we saw at La Conchita, but it certainly begs the question about what would work, what kind of foundations, what could or could not be built on any one of these. And I'm fascinated by the judge's determination that it's not necessarily in the public's interest, to make that determination in an ordinance format, at least for these particular property owners. How many properties might be affected? This is just maybe for future conversation. How many properties might be affected if we were to lift the Conejo Slide ordinance, if that were to go away? Are there a lot, or are there just very few, or what's the situation?
Councilmember House, by my count, and I'm using a map of the recent map. It's a March 2010 map of Slide Mass C, which is it's in the code, but it's based on an aerial survey, probably aerial photo. I count 12 structures remaining 12 parcels remaining within Slide Mass C, and then. So and then Slide Mass C was reduced down as a result of the Grover Hollingsworth report, and that decision was made in March of 2010. So it's considerably smaller than what it used to be for years. So we're down to 12 parcels, and then these 7 would be allowed to rebuild.
Got it. So 5 additional parcels, right. And that would include like that vacant one that the gentleman just mentioned.
That's correct.
And what I guess this is the part of the conversation I find a little bit intriguing, that perhaps in the soils report and in the structural analysis and the design, it may be found that on any given parcel, the only thing you could put there was a yurt on a floating foundation of some sort. And Mr. Estrella, it's possible that on some of these properties you could possibly put a home of a 2-story home or something with some kind of a super foundation, and in other places it just wouldn't work. There might be something else you could put there, but it wouldn't necessarily be that. Isn't that the kind of thing that would come up in the rigorous investigation of each particular parcel?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, that's exactly correct. The engineering analysis would dictate whether or not the lot is even suitable for building or not. If it's not, you would hope they would have that recommendation. On the other hand, it could be that sometimes people would put their stamp on arbitrarily We've seen that before, and that's where the check and balance would come in. Given the fact that hopefully we're dealing with, we will be dealing with licensed professionals, they're putting their license on the line that their design will meet the minimum California codes of regulations and the design that would support the structure to hopefully have a safe home. So it's true that the California Code of Regulations really do take a real close look on the construction of a foundation or home, specifically in our given area. Obviously, we're in Southern California, and we're in design categories D and E that dictate certain types of structural requirements and code compliance. And so if you can get by those requirements and get a permit issued, the thought is you would have a home that would be relatively safe and meet the minimum building code requirements.
And one parcel could support one kind of home, others would support something else, or maybe some, maybe not all at all.
Right. Well, the other item is, of course, there are zoning and requirements that they would need to comply with. So when you talk about different size, shapes, heights, et cetera, of course, those requirements will also be applicable.
Thank you. Well, the final thing is, my biggest concern is what the city's responsibility is to provide access to and utilities and all that kind of stuff. There are, we do have an obligation to do that wherever there's development, but it sounds like, at least with these 7, we've now gotten the word from the judge as to where our limits of our abilities are. And I do support this ordinance change, but and I will move that we make this change. But secondly, I want to just say, given what we've just discussed and what we decided, I'm interested in what could be done possibly for the other 5. And I just put that up there for discussion. Thank you.
So you made a motion to introduce
Yes, I did.
and
Just
subsequently adopt the
introduce.
ordinance?
Yes,
And I'll second it.
as our staff report indicates.
Okay. Ms. Murillo?
So, Mr. Estrella, if one of these experts signed off on it, they would also be saying that the home could withstand a major earthquake? I mean, we're talking about rain, but we have other challenges here, right?
Yes, Madam Mayor, Councilman Murillo, when an engineering geologist reviews the soils condition, they consider all factors, the type of soils, of course, factor in. And of course, Santa Barbara is located in a very high seismic area. So when you design a foundation system and the structural elements of the home, all those items are taken into consideration.
I understand that these folks want to stay there and they want to build there. It seems there's a danger element, and I feel a responsibility to make policy that keeps people safe. And if this area has these issues, and I know we're looking at this legal issue, but what's the right thing to do is what I'm struggling with here. I've lived in dangerous flatland areas. Everybody in Santa Barbara, we suffer to live here, and they're willing to take some risk. I just don't want the city to take the risk, and we're already responsible for the roads and the utilities. So I'm sitting here trying to decide what to do, and what the liability to the city, I think, is my first concern. Thank you.
Okay. I think you bring up a good point, Ms. Murillo, and I think Mr. House and Mr. Wiley, the way I understand and explain, and also Mr. Estrella, that what we're doing is allowing the process to start for a rebuild, but they still have to go through every single engineering requirement and permitting process just like everyone else would. And if for some reason there's a design that doesn't fit code, you wouldn't get the permit. So, and like you said, Mr. Estrella, the other structural engineers that they'd be working with would be licensed. They're putting their license, they're showing their license as their expertise, that it could be threatened if they did something that was not up to standard and up to code, and we have to do our job in making sure that whatever's built is built to the best of our ability, and knowing that we're complying with California building codes. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, that's correct.
Okay. So I appreciate the comments, Ms. Murillo. I think, though, we do have some safeguards to city liability for all those reasons. So I'm happy supporting this, and I guess we'll just stay tuned if some of my colleagues also want to continue a further discussion offline on the bigger picture. But I think the property owners here have waited gone through a whole legal challenge and all that we should probably introduce and adopt this now. And if the conversation continues, then it can continue at another day, but at least to move this forward at this point. Any other comments or suggestions from? Okay, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, thank you. Item number 7.
Item number 7, contract for the supply of electric vehicle charging units and supporting service agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Dewey.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. I'm here to talk about the opportunity that we have to install electric vehicle charging stations around town. We were first contacted by Coulomb Technologies about a year ago in March 2011, and they came to us providing free electrical vehicle charging units. And these units were paid through a Recovery Act funding administered by a grant through the Department of Energy. So their total scope nationwide was to install 4,600 charging stations, both commercial and residential units, by March 31st, 2012. Originally, their drop-dead date was December 31st, 2011, and then they got an extension onto that. So currently, they need to have these units installed by March 31st, 2012, or around that date. So Coulomb Technologies provides a technology called the ChargePoint Network. And what that does is it allows electric vehicle travelers to be able to access this information technology either through a web browser or a smartphone that gives them access to find out whether there's a EV charging station located in a particular place. It also allows for, in some cases, advanced reservation for particular stations, and it helps them keep track of their electrical vehicle charging information, like how much energy they're using, how much they're spending. This is the largest network of its type, and this is why the Department of Energy was so interested in it. It really integrates not only the charging, but also allows the Department of Energy to collect a lot of data from electric vehicles. And what the ChargePoint network provides to the city is that it allows us to recover our costs of charging, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. So basically the way that this works is that the city determines a price per hour for what we'll charge the customer, and then Coulomb will charge us 40 cents per session and a percentage of what we charge the customer to recover their costs. So Coulomb collects the money electronically and transfers the fees and pays the city the difference between what they are charging us. They'll extract the fees from the total amount and then give us the rest of the money. The initial contract period for this pilot program will end December 31st, 2013, which means that we're not obligated to participate in the ChargePoint network after that point. However, we won't have the ability to recover costs at that point, too. So there's only really one mechanism to recover costs, and that's to be part of the ChargePoint network if we're going to use these particular chargers. At first, we were working with Coulomb, and the original scope of our project was to install 19 units at various city parking facilities. These included both surface parking lots and parking structures. And the installation for these were going to be paid through a California Energy Commission grant. We had a number of problems trying to coordinate contract language with Coulomb, and also Coulomb had certain stipulations that they wanted to implement in their business model. One of the things they wanted to do is use a pre-approved contractor for installation. Well, if we were managing the contract, we had to adhere to public contracting code, so we really couldn't close the gap on that. And there were a number of other contractual issues involved with this too. And in order to simplify this and move along, we mutually agreed that we would scope this down from 19 units to install 6 units at lots 6 and 7 and at the Helena Avenue lot. These would be installed by city's facilities staff, and then we wouldn't be using an outside contractor for that. And so what we're coming today for you to authorize is for the Public Works Director to execute the contract with Coulomb to supply at least 6 charging stations and to enroll in the ChargePoint network. So these are the chargers that we'll be receiving. These are the CT2100 family chargers. They can be bollard mounted so that they're just standalone. They could be mounted on poles, or they could be wall mounted also. The way that the customer interfaces with these, a customer can obtain a Charge Pass card that's a radio frequency ID card from Coulomb, and that they can use that card to identify themselves to the charging unit and then charge accordingly by just being within proximity of that reader. The charging units are also able to use RFID-enabled credit cards, or you can also contact Coulomb through a phone number, and then you can use a standard credit card also. So these particular units have a level 1 and a level 2 charger built into them. A level 1 charger is basically a trickle charger. It uses 120 volts with a standard receptacle plug, and it can charge a Nissan Leaf from a dead battery in about 20 hours. So a level 2 charger charges about 3 times faster than a level 1 charger. So it can charge a Nissan Leaf from a dead battery in about 7 hours. So this is a table of the Coulomb transaction fees, what they expect to receive from us. And this is according to a sliding scale based on the number of transactions that we have as a customer for all of our stations. So the first tier is 1,500 transactions per month, something that we won't be surpassing for a long, long time. So the first fee is the session authorization fee, and essentially for all these transactions under $1,500 per month, they would be charging just a flat rate of 40 cents per session, just to begin the session. And then there's session processing fees. And so in that first tier, the session processing fees, if the customer is using a Charge Pass card, would be 5% of whatever we charge for our session fee. And then if they're using a credit card, they'll be charging us 6% of the session fees. So after December 31st, 2013, Coulomb will also be charging us the annual commercial service plan, which would be $230 per station to continue our service on the ChargePoint network. So the Downtown Parking Committee has already approved a proposed fee resolution that allows us to recover our charges at up to $5 per charge per hour for charging services. So also parking fees will be charged at the parking structures upon exiting. The annual cost per charging unit based on 40 hours of charging per month, it will be about $2,400. And this provides a break-even hourly rate of around $5 an hour. Here's a little bit more information about the electrical cost for the charging units. And this is important because 2 of the parking structures that we're installing these are going to be under a GS2 or a General Service 2 rate. That's a Southern California Edison electrical rate. Under the Southern California Edison rate, there's 2 components to your bill. There's your demand cost, or your instantaneous rate of electricity usage. In this case, every charging unit that we add would add 7.2 kilowatts to the instantaneous rate, and that's charged at a flat rate by Southern California Edison. So what that really means to us, it represents a fixed cost every month to us for electricity at about $129 per month. From there, we have a variable cost. That's for the actual energy used, or the kilowatt hours. And so at a level 2 charger, we'd be charging, the cost would be 58 cents per hour. So you can see the electrical cost curve on the right. And as we increase the number of hours of charging per month, that price, of course, decreases per hour. So we're anticipating that we probably get about 40 hours of charging per unit, and that would represent a cost of $3.79 per hour per charging station. So if we look at all of our costs, these would be all the costs for one charging unit. This would include the cost of electricity, demand, and energy, the charge point cost, the authorization fee of 40 cents, processing fees, whether you're using charge point card or credit card, and the service plan of $230 per year, along with $200 per year per charging station that we think it takes to maintain it. Our cost per hour would be about $5 to recover our costs. Now, we could lower this cost by putting in a new electrical service and having that electrical service under a electrical vehicle charging rate, which would be the TOU EV3 rate, and that would bring the total cost down to about $2.70, but that would require a capital investment on our part of a few $1,000s. Well, this is just a guesstimate, but it's $2,000 to $3,000 probably. So our next steps right now, Coulomb is working with our attorney's office to finalize the contract language. There's two contracts that we're looking to finish: the master services agreement and the station award agreement. If once that gets done. If council approves, we'll have the Public Works Director execute the contracts. From there, facilities will install the 6 charging units, and then facilities and downtown parking will work with Coulomb to find additional sites where we think it'll really work and where it's prudent.
Questions? I have a question. Could you go to the level 1 and 2 charging? And I'm sorry if I missed this earlier. Why would someone choose a level 1 if we're charging them $5 an hour plus parking rates? Why would someone choose a level 1 charging? I didn't catch that. Versus why not just do a level 2 charge for less time?
Mayor Schneider, I'm glad that you asked that question, because I failed to explain that we have the flexibility to set up our charges any way that we want to. So if we can set it up so that during the peak hours of the day the charges could be higher, and then during the off-peak they could be lower. We can also change the charge rate if somebody's using a level 1 charger to be a lower rate. So I was focusing on the level 2 charger.
The cost for us would be based on a level 2 charge?
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Is it the type of charge mechanism that the driver would have that would determine whether they'd have to go to a level 1 charge, or can everyone just do a level 2 charge? Or does it depend on what vehicle they have and what?
It depends on what vehicle they have.
It does.
All
Okay.
of the new generation electric vehicles have level 2 charging capability, and they probably will be using that.
Right. So I guess I'm still missing, why would we even offer a level 1 charge if it's keeping someone there longer?
In case somebody needs to charge up another type of electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid vehicle.
Okay, so there might be other vehicles out there that can only accept a level 1 charge.
Yes.
Okay, all right. That was what I want. Questions, Mr. House and then Mr. Rouse.
There's a few questions here. So I want to sort of bottom line it a little bit. So it sounds like if we have these in our parking garages and somebody comes and goes to work in the morning, they'd maybe be there all day long, they would have a chance to get their car charged up while they were staying in the lot, and they could make arrangements in advance to be able to use that facility, so they could ensure that they would have a charged vehicle by the end of the day. Is that a basic, simple way that it could be used?
Councilmember House, yes, if we allow the capability for the ChargePoint network if we enabled that feature, we could. That's
Okay.
my understanding.
Oh, well, and then is it my understanding from this that as we begin to use, as we use these, then the city actually could be, just like we do on our parking stalls themselves, we would be able to recover and more than the cost, and it would be a net benefit financially to the city for each one of these?
It is possible that we could generate profit from this. Right now, it looks like, we've been authorized in the fee resolution to charge up to $5. It looks like our cost right now under a GS2 rate is $5. As the demand for these services increase per hour, that cost can come down. So there is an opportunity in the future as demand increases to generate revenue.
Unless, of course, we put in a new electrical service where the cost would be $2 and something, and then there'd be about a $3 and something net, or about a little less than $2.50 or something net on each hour, right?
That's correct.
So, so for the investment of a couple $1,000s, we could be getting a couple dollars an hour additional to our normal parking rate for people who are using the charging station. And if we wanted to, if we had people interested in it, we could sign them up in advance, so that just like we do for the parking program where we rent out monthly parking passes, it'd be almost like that, but it would be for electric vehicle owners who are. I mean, is that the kind of enterprise that we're looking at here, possibly in the parking structures?
We will be looking into all of those options. We haven't finished a cost-benefit analysis of switching to the EV3 tariff, but we will be looking at all of those options. But we will be looking at everything.
So this is our chance to prove it out, if you will, or to begin to prove it out by having these this limited number of them, so we can begin to get some data on it and see what interest there is.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we're looking at this as a pilot program, so we're going to try to get as much information as we can. The one thing that we know is that electric vehicles are not going away, that demand for them are going to increase, and that we will probably be in this business in some form or another. And so we want to make the best decisions based on real information. This is our first step into that.
And I guess my big question is, we're authorized for more, right? For how many did you say we're authorized?
Well, for as many as we can get from Coulomb Technologies. So we don't know how many extra they have right now. Once we install the 6, we'll go back to them. If we find opportunities, we'll check with them to see if we have more available, but that hasn't been disclosed to us, the exact number.
Okay, thank you. Then to Mr. Wiley. Mr. Wiley, you sent a letter back, I think, to the Community Environmental Council and talked about your concerns about the kind of contract or how difficult it was to really understand, because it seemed kind of convoluted, at least to your office. And is that a major limitation right now, do you see, for us? Maybe a simplified contract would somehow make it more likely that we'd want to take advantage of the opportunity to have as many of these as were available? Is that a major stumbling block at this point?
No, I don't believe so. In the recent weeks, we have been working directly with Coulomb's attorneys, which is a new development, and revising the contract and making it understandable. And I would have to say convoluted would be putting it mildly. The PowerPoint presentation here really was the first time I've seen this explained in such a way that is somewhat understandable, because of this subscription agreement and what it was we were getting free. And the charter says that the city attorney's office is required to approve all city contracts as to form. We take that pretty seriously, and we insist on understanding those contracts. And until recently, we could not make heads or tails of these contracts or the relationship. And there were some pretty serious paragraphs about city liability and things like that we didn't even, as I say, understand who's billing whom and who sets the rates and things like that. But in the last 2-3 weeks, I think we were getting to the bottom of that. We have draft, Tava Ostringer in our office has worked a lot on this, and I think we have drafts that, assuming Coulomb and their attorneys will continue to work with us, we can finalize pretty soon.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Mayor, I'm really glad to hear that we're starting to figure and untangle this thing, and I'm hopeful that we can do more.
Okay. Mr. Rouston, we also have some public comment, so leave it to questions. I see a lot of lights on. Go ahead.
Mr. Dewey, I hate to try to do math on television, but I'm trying to get my arms around the range of the vehicle and the 7-hour level 2 charging capability, assuming, of course, it's a completely dead battery. Is that correct?
Yes.
So if you were, now the range of these vehicles are typically 90 miles. Is that the max range, or is that?
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but I read the Nissan Leaf wiki, and it said that traveling on the highway, they have a range of about 70 miles.
Okay, so let's say we're coming up from Thousand Oaks, and we're going to be here for the 7-hour time to charge this car. So we're going to pay $35 to Coulomb, or to the whatever the machine is, plus Mr. Garza, the max parking for the parking structure is, how much is that? 12?
It'll be up to $20 depending on how.
Can you go to the mic, please, Mr. Garza? Mr. Garza, yeah.
Councilmember Rouse, it'll depend on whether he's there on a weekday or a weekend. It could be up to $20.
Okay. Well, I'm just, because we keep tossing around these 100 MPG equivalents and which are based on a cost thing, but I'm looking at, and obviously we're not normally talking about the parking structure fee on top of that and the charging fee, but I'm trying to get a handle on the attractiveness of the way we've got this set up right now for somebody driving up from Thousand Oaks who would essentially have a spent battery at that point in time. So they could be paying as much as $55 to do the parking and charging to leave to do that mileage. Okay. My second question was on the demand on the system. Mr. Dewey, in the CAR, you've got it down to be about $4,800 for the system in terms of electrical charges, or what it would cost the parking system, I should say, to perform these services. What kind of usage were you basing in terms of kilowatt hours or number of vehicles, I suppose? And because I'm having a hard time with how much demand we assume would happen and how we come up with that. That's
The assumptions were mine. They were guesses about how much demand that we would have to begin with. So my guess was that we would have about 40 hours of charging per month, an average of 4 hours charging, so 10 sessions.
10 per month?
Yes.
Okay.
Per station.
10 per month per station?
Correct.
Okay, so what does that work out to?
240, didn't it? You said 6 stations, 4 hours, 40 hours?
No, 10 sessions. 10 sessions per station, so
Yeah,
60
and
sessions per month, so 2 cars per day.
So you would have, approximately, yeah.
Okay.
I'll take your word for it.
So how many hours does that come out, charging?
So it'd be 40 hours of charging per month.
Per
station.
Okay, because I agree with your statement. These cars are here, and the demand is going to grow.
Yes.
But we want to try to get this as right as we can. Of course, we don't know. There's a lot of unknowns going in, clearly. So, all right, I just kind of want to get some, because I was trying to look at the ongoing thing after December 31. We will still be paying this portion of these fees into the Cullum, I suppose, we'll start a relationship with them, or is it going to be the charge point folks? Is that?
During the initial period, we will not be paying the $230 service plan, the commercial service plan for the ChargePoint network. After December 31st, then we'll start paying that. And so my total costs include that annual service fee.
And then will the customer be able to use a normal credit card besides the ChargePoint type card?
Yes.
So then that customer would then incur that cost on top of, or we would incur the purchasing cost on top of that?
No, what we would do is we would just set a rate. Let's say that the rate is $1. What we would pay to Coulomb is 40 cents out of the dollar, and then we would pay, if they were paying by a credit card, we'd be paying 6 cents for that, or 6%. So we would pay to Coulomb 46 cents, and then we would recover 54 cents.
Okay. Well, once again, I'm looking at the devil's advocate worst case scenario from, like you say, from driving up from Westlake, and you're talking about a lot of money, like $55 to go the 75 miles. So it's interesting. Okay, thank you.
The contract ends 2013, not this year, December 31st. Correct?
Madam Mayor, yes,
Okay,
that's correct.
so it's a little more than a year. Mr. White and then Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Obviously, as a pilot program, this has a very small, or even perhaps a virtually negligible impact on the parking system. But if more charging stations were contemplated, then they might conceivably impact on the revenues and the flow of parking through the system. And I'd be interested as this thing moves along in hearing that comparison of revenues, of capacities, any sort of pearls of wisdom that you could deliver on that topic of just how these charging stations are behaving and influencing the parking in any given spot. As I say, when there's 6 of them over the whole system, it probably doesn't amount. It's in the noise, but that I would be curious to hear about the comparison of revenues that you might see, as well as any influence on the use of the parking, either lot or garage, depending on which system we're talking about.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Mayor, I'm trying to get a handle on, I think a little bit like Mr. Rouse's, who our real customers are, who you imagine the customer to be. So have you thought a little bit about that? I hope more than I have.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, yeah, we have thought about that, and we will probably, most people that have electric vehicles in town will be charging up at their homes. That's the most economical thing to do. So this would be attracting people from outside of our area that would be coming here with an electrical vehicle to visit and shop and do whatever we do in Santa Barbara.
Okay. And right now that was what, a Nissan Leaf, a Tesla, a Fisker? Volt. But the main ones right now are Leaf and Volt, right?
Yes.
And Volt has longer capacity because it's a hybrid, right?
The plug-in hybrid, yes.
Okay, plug-in, I'm not sure what that means, but in other words, you can go 300 miles on a Volt without having to recharge.
Right, yeah, it has the ability to use fuel.
Okay. I follow up on what Mr. White said. We for sure want to measure, or we have a way of keeping track of how much do these really get used. I know that the existing stations in, near the library are, I think, either outmoded or unused, but I rarely see any car in there.
Yes, there's 2 charging stations in Lot 7, and one of them is used periodically, and then the Ford charging unit I don't think is used at all anymore. And we are planning to keep the, maybe Mr. Garza can speak to this a little bit.
Councilmember Hotchkiss, I wanted to clarify that right now we have 4 charging spaces for chargers, EVs to use, the 2 at the library lot and the 2 at Grana Garage. There are many vehicles that come in with the 110 plugins, and as Mr. Dewey said, there's one charger that accommodates the RAV4, and so we're actually only adding 2 net spaces to the system.
Understand. Well, it's fine if they get used, but we will have a way of tracking, you know, how many cars, how long each charge, whatever. Can we be that refined?
Yes, we'll have a lot of information, and that's really why we are interested in embarking on this pilot program, is try to get as much information about the future of EV charging as we can.
Okay. If, you know, as worst case scenario, it doesn't seem like it's working come December 31st, 2013, for us to, as it were, pull the plug, what's that going to cost us?
It shouldn't cost us anything to stop the service with the ChargePoint network. The charging units eventually will become ours, and we can do whatever we want with them. We can enable them so that it supplies free charging. We do not have any of the capabilities of the ChargePoint network, so we can't recover our cost at that point.
Right.
So, I mean, it just becomes a simple electric vehicle charger that we don't recover our costs on if we do not continue with the ChargePoint network.
Right. Well, if I were a car owner, I could definitely see the advantage of being plugged into that system where you can find out where there's a station, reserve it or whatever. I mean, that's an important feature. Where is Coulomb up and running now? Is it, I guess, is the first question.
Yeah, they've installed charging units across the U.S., but locally there's 3 units in Solvang, I believe. The city of Ventura has 10 charging stations. The county of Santa Barbara will be installing 9. The city of Goleta will be installing 1. Carpinteria will be installing 1. And the city of Burbank has 11 stations running.
Okay. So of those you named, how many are existing? Some you kept saying will be installing. Do we know?
To my knowledge, there's 3 that are installed in Solvang, 10 that are installed in Ventura.
And Ventura, okay.
Yes.
Great, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. We do have a public speaker, Michael Chiakos. One more. Good afternoon.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, my name is Michael Chiakos with the Community Environmental Council, and we support this effort to put in EV charging stations. In fact, I was just up at Solvang last Thursday, and they're in the ground, they're working, and we drove an electric vehicle. It's very easy, just swipe a credit card, charge up, and just took a few seconds. So I wanted to bring us back to the greater picture of how electric vehicles provide huge benefits to any region that embraces them. We've mentioned that they achieve 100 miles per gallon equivalent. This is on the EPA window sticker. This is because they're 3 times more efficient than a gasoline car. You notice there's very little heat, noise, exhaust wasted. They also produce 0 tailpipe emissions. That's why we're working with the Air Pollution Control District to incentivize and to get charging stations in our region and make it easier to use electric vehicles. And I want to point out that we're not paid per station to advocate for these, that this is part of our mission as we transition to renewable energy and sustainable transportation. On California's current electricity grid, because you do have to charge them up somewhere, they reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 75% compared to a gasoline vehicle. It's because our electrical grid is very clean here, and these vehicles will actually get cleaner as they get older. Right now we have 20% renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal in our grid, and it's legislated to go up to 33% by 2020. There's been a lot of discussion about charging. If you charge at night at your house, it costs around $1 per gallon equivalent, and maybe we can discuss a little bit about what you plan to charge. I just wanted to note, though, that Southern California Edison has forecasted that Santa Barbara is going to be a huge early adopter market, and is. They forecasted we are the #4 market out of the 183 cities in their service territory. By 2020, they're expecting a base case of 450,000 electric vehicles with a high case of 1 million. Obviously, it depends what happens with gas prices. So because of these projections, we were hoping that more than 6 would be put in the city. We realized that, that the 6 are happening now, but we were hoping that all 19 could be added. CEC sent a letter that talked a little bit about the frustration with the delay and outcome of this process, but I hope that you won't shoot the messenger. We're really happy to debrief with staff. We have a long, positive, and productive relationship with the city, and we really look forward to that continuing. And last thing I might want to add is I really hope that we don't charge $5 per hour. You noted that the actual cost of electricity is 58 cents. There were some numbers included in there, the $230 annual fee that we won't have to pay for a couple years, and other things as well. So I hope that we can recalculate them, charge a more reasonable rate so that people will want to use these charging stations. Thank you.
Do you know what the city of Ventura and Solvang and others are charging per hour?
The city of Solvang is charging $1.25 per hour, and Ventura is charging 50 cents per hour, which is to recover the cost of electricity.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. House has a question for you.
Mr. Chiakos, thank you very much for being here. This sort of reminds me, it doesn't remind me, it makes me think about the days when there was a conversion from the horse to the car. And I imagine there was a city council trying to figure out how much it cost to provide the first gas station in their municipality, and they're trying to figure out all these little details. And I'm interested in hearing your perspective in terms of scale and how important that is. Usually when you're adopting a new technology, if you tiptoe into it so tiny and so carefully, I mean, like just one little example, 6 as opposed to 19, it may not have the draw or the pull or the power. And you've been doing quite a bit of research into how these things are being utilized elsewhere. I'm also thinking, looking at Mr. Rouse here, the marketing potential for our downtown to be known as a really robust early adopter, but to really draw people to our city. So with your mission to fossil-free by 33, how do you see us just tiptoeing in with 6 versus, say, 19?
Well, yeah, I think the 19 is very important. For example, just people who are commuting to Santa Barbara, say, from Ventura or Solvang, they would have an option if we have more charging stations to purchase an electric vehicle or drive their electric vehicle here, charge up all day, and that would provide a lot of benefit. If we set the price at $5, we're not going to get very many people wanting to charge up here. So I think having a lower price and trying to get more people to adopt this technology would be beneficial.
So it's an economy of scale a little bit there.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, did you have a question for Mr. Chiakos? Come back up,
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Rouse. Go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate the enthusiasm, the desire to move forward with this program quickly. I actually do, however, appreciate Mr. Dewey's perspective on getting this thing started and realizing how cryptic our relationship with Cullum has been so far. So I'm happy with the approach we're taking. I wanted to ask you about your Solvang experience because you drove up in an electric vehicle and you went up there and charged. So what kind of vehicle did you have?
So we drove.
What kind of vehicle did you have? How much of your capacity did you use? How long did it take you to charge? How much did it cost you?
So we drove up there in a Chevy Volt. So it has around a 35, obviously this changes depending on if you're on the freeway going over mountains, but the EPA rates it at a 35-mile range, all electric. So almost the entire way that we got to Solvang was electric power, and just at the very end it turned to gasoline and then could go another 300 miles. Then we charged up there in Solvang for about an hour and a half, and we got around, I think, 15 miles of extra range. So half our way back to Santa Barbara, we were on electric power. And so this would be a circumstance that many commuters, perhaps if they're coming up from Ventura, would be able to charge up their Volt or their plug-in hybrid. The plug-in Prius is coming out in a couple months. It will probably be a very top seller. It's a plug-in hybrid, so you can charge up for a limited amount of your battery range, take the benefits of using electricity, and then the gasoline kicks in after.
And how long was your charging session?
About an hour and a half.
About an hour and a half. I can see the viability of the hybrid in those circumstances. That just not everybody has that kind of time to hang out and get charged
right.
up. So.
These first generation vehicles charge slower. So the new Chevy Volt and Nissan Leaf that are coming out, the 2013 models that are coming out later this year, will charge twice as fast. So they'll actually use twice as much electricity and charge twice as fast.
And then do you see at some point in time these going away from municipal facilities into private facilities, like a service station would have this type of capacity they could charge for? Is that in the realm of possibility? I mean, I don't know if that's been
yeah, early
penciled
deployment
out.
is for central business districts like here, for shopping centers, places where people will spend some time. There's also DC fast charging stations that could charge an electric vehicle in 20 to 30 minutes. We are considering one of these for the Santa Barbara area, but they're very, much more expensive. For right now, though, these stations are excellent for just expanding your range of electric driving, so that you could go to Solvang, top off for an hour or two. Not many people are going to be driving in with nothing on their battery and staying for 7 hours. They're just going to top off for a couple hours and then be able to either extend the electric range of their plug-in hybrid or be able to stay for a while and then get enough range to get home.
And the last question is, prior to Solvang's initiation of this system, did their CAR look something like what we're looking at here to their analysis? Or is it similar, or is it hard to compare?
I didn't review their CR.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Francisco also has a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Chiakos, you mentioned that the Community Environmental Council isn't getting a per station fee for this, but is there any kind of financial relationship between CEC and Coulomb or APCD or some other funding agency?
We don't have any relationship with Coulomb or Ecotality, which is also putting charging stations in Santa Barbara. We do have a relationship with the Air Pollution Control District. They have a grant to incentivize electric vehicles, and we're assisting them on that effort.
So you are receiving some of that APCD money to do this
Exactly,
work?
yeah. It's not
Okay.
on a per station basis.
Sure.
It's in general incentivizing electric vehicles and also working on an electric vehicle readiness plan.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
You've been grilled enough. Thank you. It's to the council. Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Quick question. How many electric cars do we have in town now? Do we know?
Councilmember Hotchkiss, I do not know.
I just did some extrapolation, and there are, I think, 10,000 volts sold nationwide. And if, this is obviously crude, but if we just use our population, that means we got about 3. So, 3.3, I think. So, but we probably have a few more than that. I'm just wondering what the future market is here. So I agree with your approach to approach this carefully and cautiously, and let's see how it works. And I'm glad we can really track how many cars we got that are using it, the times, et cetera, so we know who what our market really is. Thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
I'd like to make a motion, Madam Mayor.
Go right ahead.
I'd like to move staff recommendations for both item A and item B.
Second. Okay, Mr. Francisco?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to agree with Mr. Hotchkiss and agree with staff. I think that one of the advantages of this system and the ChargePoint network is that we will get very precise information about who's charging when for how long. And starting out in this modest way, I think, is a good way to make sure that the city recovers its costs. So we may well find that $5 an hour is too much to charge, but that's a kind of balancing act we do all the time with the parking system, figuring out price points, demand. So this looks like a good start. Thank you for your work.
Mr. House?
I just want to comment that I think it would be good for our staff to work with Conference and Visitors Bureau. I think it's important that they have a chance to include that in their marketing of the city and get the word out so that it's known and understood that this is available. And secondly, I would really wish that we could take advantage of this opportunity to start with modest rates. I really don't think that we want to disincentivize this. And if there's a way for us to arrange to install the new power and actually get those rates down, I think that will benefit us in the long run. There's certainly a short term and there's a long term. And if we can start out right, we'll have people who begin to use this and find it to their benefit, and that'll help to fuel it for the future. And I thank everyone here for it. I think you're going to get a real supportive council to move this small program forward. I really would like to see you come back again as soon as you feel confident and help us make a decision to go with more.
Mr. Dewey, when do you expect the 6 units to be installed and ready to go?
Madam Mayor, we expect this to roll out almost immediately as soon as this, we get our contract language rolled out. So I would imagine within the next 3 months.
Okay. It's kind of funny. The Eeyore came to mind up here. I don't know why. I feel like we should be more excited about something here. That this is. I appreciate and all my colleagues' questions about making sure we're doing the right thing and acting cautiously and being the devil's advocate and that's great and we need to do that. But I think I want to extend my thanks for your work and to CECs and others for, I think, is going to be a great opportunity to provide an option for folks who want to come here who have an electric vehicle. It's a convenience for them to have something available in our downtown parking lots. And we hope that can be a draw. I agree with Mr. House about working with the Conference and Visitors Bureau, and when I took a test drive recently, it's all interconnected, so when you're driving, you know exactly where to go to get plugged in if you need to, and I know that maybe that's a little too much information to have, but it must be convenient if you need to, to charge up. But I would also appreciate, I'll vote for this now with the fee structure, but I do think we do need to look a little more carefully at what other local jurisdictions are doing. We don't know how much the county yet is going to charge, or Goleta. If we are such an outlier for the $5 an hour, that might prove to hurt us later. And so I think maybe in a few months or something, maybe through the Downtown Parking Committee, some way just to reassess that dollar amount and make sure that it fits. I appreciate and understand the rationale behind the $5, but if it means no one shows up because they just go to Goleta instead, then we've just lost the whole point, So I'd appreciate that if you can look in that in the next few months. But no, I'm excited for this moving forward finally. And finally, whatever we can do to get the other 13, right? Yeah, 13 other charging stations, I'd like to, I don't know, whatever I can say to say go for it, please do. I think it can create more of an opportunity for all of us. Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree on the rate question, and we don't have a specific action about a reevaluation or a report back or something like that, and I think that might be useful for us to have. Is it in 6 months or whatever to come back and report in on how that's doing? Because if we're at 500% of the competition in terms of price, then we can understand that might not work. So
I don't know if the budget session is too soon to really analyze it.
Yeah,
that's
it's
just
too
a couple
soon.
of months, but 4
that's
months,
gonna-
6 months, something like that. Direction to come back with that?
Come back in 6 months and.
How about 3 months after they go live?
3 months after they go live? Yeah. Okay. Is everyone okay with that?
Thank you.
So can we just, the maker of the motion, the seconder, can we just add that to the motion to come back in 3 months after they go live, just with the rate?
I'm fine adding that in, Madam Mayor.
Okay. And seconder? Okay. Okay, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, any council member committee assignment reports? Ms. Murillo.
It was my pleasure to be at the Kids Network Impact Awards, and our Santa Barbara Youth Council was honored for their community service. Congratulations, Youth Council. I was at the Green Year Library at the East Side Library this weekend, and the staff presented its newly refurbished, newly re-landscaped outdoor patios. Really lovely. And I went to the Mesa Village on the community side. The Mesa Village meeting. They're organizing street teams, sort of micro neighborhood alliances. Really cool stuff. And then I'd just like to give a shout out to the Los Padres 4-H Club. I was their speaker last night. So hello, guys.
You've been busy. Thanks. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At the last meeting of the Airport Commission, I had a rather impassioned presentation about the potential naming of the airport. So it's between Mr. Ricard and, of course, Mr. Murphy. There we go. I got a feeling that they're going to want to direct that back towards this body at some point in time.
I think it's supposed to come back here, right?
Was it airport or terminal?
Terminal.
I know. I got down to restrooms at one point. I'm not really sure.
I hope it was terminal and not airport.
I think it was the terminal discussion. Any other council member committee assignment reports? Okay, we have a couple of closed sessions to mention.
Item number 8, conference with labor negotiator. And item number 9, conference with legal counsel pending litigation.
Thank you. And we won't have anything to report out from there, so we'll adjourn from there. But I'd like to adjourn in John Logan Scott's memory. He was a city manager, city administrator for the city of Santa Barbara between March of 1973 and December of 1976. He died just recently. He was 93. And just to acknowledge his service to the city and adjourn in his memory. Thank you.